All right. Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is Jenny Hendricks, who has a really pretty amazing story, but surprisingly common story in terms of being able to turn her life and her health around with food. And she now does homesteading and a variety of other. Well, I'm going to let her tell the whole story, but preparing and creating the kind of food that really lives up to what Hippocrates said: let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food. I've had a chance to taste some of it. She sent me some beef jerky, and I have to say it was better than any beef jerky I've ever had. It's like you taste beef jerky, let's say, from a store or whatever, and there's just the sense that you're like, this isn't all meat. It feels like there's some other stuff just mushed in there. But I was blown away. I had to I've had to exercise quite a bit of self control not to eat everything that she sent, all in one sitting. So we're going to talk a bit about that, and I think the meat part of it is particularly interesting because America's a very meat driven society, as it should be, in my opinion. But the quality of anything is the outcome of everything. And her food is really, really high quality. And she's going to talk a little bit about the impact that better eating has had on her life, as well as the people who are her clients and customers. So stay tuned for that. Now, before we begin, I'm going to remind my listeners too, if you're brand new to the show, be sure to get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. As the name would imply, it only takes 9 minutes. So I don't want to hear this. Oh, I don't have time to work out. Well, now you do. And it's based around movements that you can learn in about 30 seconds. So these aren't really complicated, highly technical movements. They're based around the natural movement patterns of your body. And just like how eating naturally and more closely to nature is great for the health and function of your body, same thing is true for your training. And so I outline how to do this in the 9-minute challenge. And it can also be done in conjunction with what you're currently doing, because it's not so fatiguing or exhausting that your regular workouts just, have to take a back seat. You can do them either before your regular workouts as part of an extended warm up, afterward as a finisher. You can do them on in between days, whenever you want, but I think you're going to like it quite a bit. So go to 9minutechallenge.com and you get your own free copy of it. And that is the number 9minutechallenge.com. So without further ado, Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I have to say, I was really blown away by some of the stuff that you told me about your own journey through better eating. And again, I mentioned a little earlier, this is something that I have definitely found to be the case with me. And I'll give just one small example because you might be able to describe why this happened. I still don't have any idea. When I was a little kid, I had kind of wavy hair, and I grew up very much on what I would say is like a low fat diet. Like my parents grew up and they were born in the 50s, kind of, raised and came of age in the 70s. And that was when like the low fat, I'm going to say fad because it's silly, really, if you think about it. But that was when it like kind of came into full swing, I think. And so that was just sort of like the nutritional information that they had emblazoned in their head. So I think we had a pretty low fat diet for the most part. And it wasn't until I want to say probably 2011, 2012. I don't know what spurred it on, but I started eating a lot more dietary fat and my hair got really curly. Like it went from, wavy to, and again, when I say wavy, I mean not like light curly, but just not not like completely straight to like bam, like almost like an afro. When it started to grow out, when I say it grew out, I mean it literally grew out. It was like it wasn't just down as it had in the past, but outward. And even my parents were amazed because we couldn't really describe it. The only thing I can think that possibly changed it was the increase in fat that I had been consuming. And so that was, I think, the first time I really understood the power of eating and the effect that it could have on your body. Not just how it looked in the mirror, but a lot of other processes that are going on. And your story is even more incredible in many ways. And I want to give you the chance to tell us a little bit about it. So, first, I want to ask, did you always grow up on a farm or homesteading, or is this something you kind of started doing later in life?
No, my grandparents had a farm, so we went and visited them every summer, but we were city slickers growing up. And I loved going out to my grandparents' farm. I wish that I had paid more attention to what they were doing, asked more questions, but I was like, the push towards college and you need to grow up and do something productive with your life.
Yeah.
So I actually went into computer science, not thinking twice that I would ever be a chicken farmer when I grew up. But it's funny you mentioned the curly hair because when I was growing up, I had very straight hair.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, I want the curly, the wavy hair and all this. And now that I've changed my whole diet, most days my hair goes really curly.
Mhm.
And so now it's like trying to get it to straighten out is more of the challenge. And it's also thickened up a lot more as well.
Mhm.
So I do believe that the healthy diet does that. But as far as my grandparents, they had just chickens were everywhere. And it's funny you mentioned that because, like, I do have a book coming out later this summer, and it does talk about kind of the adventures on the farm and then some of the adventures we have on our own personal farm and what you don't expect when raising the chickens.
Yeah. I'm sure that raising animals has got to be an interesting experience. Chickens would probably, I would imagine, would be a little bit better behaved than like, pigs or no, they're just crazy like anything else.
No, we actually have Bertha, the very mean chicken, who actually has her own mugshot because she is so, so horrible. I'll take a cow any day to the chickens.
Cows are pretty docile. I used to work as I worked in I guess you could say like a dairy farm kind of a thing when I lived on a kibbutz in Israel. And yeah, the cows were always like, you know, they they were easy to get along with. They were usually pretty scared of people. Like if we were to go into their cages, they would just instinctively kind of walk away from us. There were only a couple who were like friendly and actually wanted to be pet and stuff like that, but they were never. I take that back. Sometimes they would charge, but all you had to do is like put your hands up, make yourself big, and then they would stop and go a different direction. But yeah, otherwise, I always found cows to be pretty docile. Chickens, I guess I've never really had that much contact with. So, uh, it was purely an assumption because they're small, people are big, maybe they're scared, but it sounds like they can be mean.
Well, roosters, they're vicious.
Oh, sure,
And
yeah, roosters are different. Yeah,
and the chickens, if you try to get their eggs, they actually do aim for the vein in your wrist. I swear they do. And if they hit it, you're going to bleed out. So my grandparents actually had this huge ironclad glove that they wore in there just to protect themselves.
wow,
And I never understood why as a child until we got Bertha. Now I'm like, I wish that they had left that to me.
yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things they figured it had its own explanation and that it really didn't need to go into a lot of detail on, I would imagine. But
Apparently they did.
yeah, but it turns out that's not necessarily the case. So when you started homesteading, did you mention that you've only really been in the business of trying to help other people with their own eating habits for the last couple of years, but you've been homesteading for quite a bit longer. Is that right?
That is correct. I started homesteading when I started having health issues because I couldn't find the food I wanted in the grocery store. And specifically, when I went to the grocery store and was looking at meat, they would never really tell you what they put into the food. It's just, oh, this is beef, this is chicken, and they don't feel like any further explanation is required. And so I couldn't understand why I kept getting so sick on this meat. And come to find out that 99.9% of all animal feed is made up of soy and corn. And what I didn't realize at the time is I was having a horrible soy reaction where I would swell up, I would get sick, I would throw up. It was just like this horrible thing. Every time I had soy, it was at least a week long torture session until I started feeling better.
Yeah.
So at that point, I just totally cut out all meat and I became a vegan for almost a decade as I
Wow.
was trying to figure out, well, how do I get the meat? It never occurred to me, raise your own meat. It was like, well, of course you have to buy meat. So I was raising my own vegetables, but the meat came later when I was like, what if we just tried to do this ourselves? And so we found basically when we found the soy-free feed for chickens, it was $80 a bag. Now
Wow.
it's gone down in price since then considerably for the homesteader, but at the time it was like this cutting edge thing where people, if you wanted no soy, no corn, no medication, you were going to pay out the nose for it.
Hmm.
And like literally these chickens went through about a bag a week. So like those eggs were expensive,
Yeah.
but I could eat them and I felt better. And because I was getting anemic, because I wasn't having protein, the
Mhm.
iron, the B12, like
Oh, hang on a second. I think you've accidentally muted yourself.
what?
There we go.
Mm,
Okay, you were accidentally muted. Go on.
no, the phone was
You said that you were anemic when you were a vegan because you weren't getting enough protein, you weren't getting enough iron, and even just the
correct.
addition of some quality eggs started to fix that.
It did. It is amazing until you've had the farm fresh eggs. Like the night and day difference between the grocery store is completely unreal.
Hmm.
So just introducing the eggs. And then we realized we had too many roosters. So then, of course, Fabio, he was the ladies' man, so he got to stick around. But Delicious, he went to the dinner table and he did live up to his name. He was amazing.
Yeah, chickens, roosters. If you end up with a name, if you're listening and you end up with a name like Delicious, just know that you're probably going to be on the chopping block. Now, did you notice when you ate Delicious that you got this that your feelings of wellness started to increase even more, and you were like, "Hey, maybe I can eat meat, and it's not just the eggs that are going to be okay with me, but the problem was actually the contents of the food that these animals were being fed, and not the animals themselves."
Correct. Like it was amazing. Like I was like just holding my breath, going, "Oh my goodness, this is probably going to make me sick," and eating it. And then I was like, I felt pretty good, and I was
Yeah,
like amazed. And then a couple hours went by, and I'm like, I feel really good, and I didn't get sick. And I was like, oh, this is great. We have got, and that's of course when mm, the hatchery started because the incubation just went out of control at that point. So I'm like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, we're gonna have chickens out.
yeah,
um, I think that's when other people started seeing it because a lot of people knew me and they were seeing a difference in me, in my complexion, and my energy level. I started having people drive 2 hours down to the farm just to started taking a look, asking me questions, what I was doing different, what we were feeding our chickens. And it just became to a point where I was like, you know what, I really need just to start this as an actual business because we have so many people coming.
yeah.
And it was a lot of women too, about my age that were like, you know what, I'm about to hit menopause and my hormones are kind of getting out of control. And I didn't realize how much the meat was affecting women's hormones as much as it was until I started getting back. So many of my customers started coming back and talking to me about their experience.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the hormone side of things because I think, at least for men, I think most men think of, if you say like hormonal issues, people are like, men are like, oh, it's women. Women have hormonal issues. I don't know what that's all about. That's their problem, not mine. But the reality is that actually men nowadays have a lot of hormonal issues too, and in particular, low testosterone has reached like absolutely epidemic levels. And what used to be normal is now considered like the higher end of normal, and it's kind of a scary thing because for men, it's like testosterone is the hormone that is going to allow them to build muscle. It kind of gives you that sense of wanting to go out and conquer, whether it's at work or whether it's, at a sport or a physical activity, or it gives you like a zest for life. And so the hormonal issues that people face nowadays, it's not just, again, like men, like, I don't know, hot flashes. She's upset. I don't know what's going on. It's actually everybody's having hormonal issues, and I think a big part of it has to be the food that we're eating, at least on some level. And you touched on something that I think is very important. It's that what you are not just what you eat, but also what your food eats. So if
Correct.
they're eating like the equivalent of, like, they're only being fed McDonald's because that's what, like the chicken and cow version of McDonald's, because that's what's going to fatten them up more quickly. It's like, I mean, we look at ourselves, it's like that, yeah, that would be the way to fatten us up, is you feed us crappy food that we're not supposed to be eating. And we get a lot bigger. So a lot of times it sounds like even if people are making better choices, like they're reaching for some, beef or chicken or eggs or, other things that are much closer to the way nature intended. The next thing that a lot of people have to consider is the quality of the food that stuff has been fed.
Right. And I think there's a lot of confusion because even in the grocery store, they put a lot of these marketing labels, like free range on your chickens or grass fed on your beef. And it doesn't quite mean what people think it does.
Yeah.
For instance, let's just take the free range chicken. Free range just means that it is in a hoop house with access to the outside. And
Hmm.
so if they open the door, even if they have just 1 square foot of space they could go out on, even if they never go out on there, because most of the time a chicken won't leave its flock. So if
Mm.
everyone's inside, most of all the chickens are going to stay inside. They're not going to just go explore by themselves. So now they can mark it up and call it free range and charge you more money, but nothing has changed from the regular commercial chicken.
Hmm.
And when you are also with the grass fed beef doesn't mean that it was finished on grass. It just means that it started its life on grass and then it could be finished grain or whatever else. And that grain is just to fatten it up at the last few weeks of its life to get it to market very quickly. And you're buying grass fed beef that is no different than the Walmart brand, exactly the same, but it sounds better because we're calling it grass fed now.
Now, I've heard too, you mentioned the finished part, which is basically like last couple weeks of its life, refers to whatever it ate then. Is there any benefit to like grain fed most of the life and then grass fed the last couple of weeks? Or are you still dealing with the same issue that you can't really outwork the majority of what they've eaten throughout their life? It's going to take longer to fix that problem.
Well, you're still going to have all that fat they accumulated from the grain
Right.
because when a cow wasn't really meant to eat grain ever. In fact, what it basically does is it causes them a lot of internal gas
Yeah.
and bloating and just makes the cow just absolutely miserable because they actually have more than one stomach. So
Yeah.
they're when they're chewing their cud, it's going through it. And so that grain doesn't digest, it just ferments basically in their stomach. So it's just going to be a very unhealthy cow.
Right.
And you're gonna have more saturated fat. You're gonna just you're not gonna have the other part of it is you're not gonna have as much omega 3s in a grain-fed cow. So because grass is one of your highest plants that have the omega 3, when the cows eat that, then your grass-fed and grass-finished cows are also going to be higher on omega 3s instead of the grain-finished cows, which are higher on omega 6s, which are going to cause the inflammation in your body.
Interesting. Interesting. So the contents of what they eat is going to go not just into the muscle tissue but also into the fat. So if you get like I like a nice kind of fat cut of me. I like the fat, in a cow. A lot of
Yeah,
people don't, but I think it's really tasty. But that also means then that the quality of the fat even is different because it's absorbing the food that they eat so that even if you finish them on grass as opposed to grain or whatever the case may be, it's not going to eliminate what they ate before. It's just maybe mildly better, and they can charge a higher price essentially.
that is correct. Now, here's the other thing people don't consider is that we don't spray our pastures, but pesticides are fat soluble.
Hmm.
So if a cow is grazing on a pasture that has grass that's been sprayed all these pesticides and they eat it, it's not just going into their system and going out. It's going to get into the fatty tissue
Hmm.
of that meat. So actually, the beef and other types of meat are actually should be number one on the dirty dozen list
Mm.
in front of strawberries and anything else because you can't wash those pesticides off. They're actually right inside that fat.
Now, what is so bad about the pesticides exactly? Because as far as I know, and what most people know, they're designed to keep the bugs from eating the crop, and that makes it easier for farmers to they have less risk of losing their crop to a bug infestation or something like that. So, I mean, they're spraying it obviously with a low enough amount that it's not it's safe to eat, is at least what we're told. I mean, but what are the downsides of it? Even if it's safe to eat, like over the long haul, if I'm understanding correctly, the more of the pesticide residue or whatever that you end up ingesting might end up causing you a variety of problems.
Correct. Now, I don't know what the long term effects of it are personally, but I will tell you this. For me personally, I have chemical reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm around chemicals or whatnot, I swell. I have issues. So for me, I try to avoid all of it.
Mm.
And I feel better when I'm eating very clean food. And when I say clean, I mean, I don't want it to have eaten pesticides on the grass. I don't want it to have grain. I mean, I'm picky. My whole thing is because I have so many reactions. If I can't personally eat it, I don't sell it. And
Yeah,
that's just how I feel about it. So I have a lot higher criteria than the average person, but I've been through so many health issues that I take it really seriously. And I would rather, I just don't cut corners on things
sure.
because it's important to me.
Yeah, I
Probably as much as the exercising is to you. It's just we're
certainly.
not cutting corners.
No, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that too, that if you can't eat it, you won't sell it. And it's like, there are a lot of people who may not have experienced the issues that you have, but they know they're experiencing some sort of an issue. Like, maybe they're having a hard time losing weight. They're finding all sorts of health issues that the doctors can't figure out. Because I mean, it sounds like from what we when we talked earlier that that was one of the things that you were encountering, is that you were losing weight at like a rapid rate, and your doctors told you that if you kept going down that path, you were going to die. But they couldn't
Correct.
tell you what to do to fix it, because it wasn't like, I think, remember when I was a kid, we had to, I don't remember if this was elementary or probably middle school, maybe high school, we talked about eating disorders, and there was, discussion about anorexia and bulimia and stuff like that. It's like those are things that are obviously, they're bad and they're disorders, but doctors know what to do. It's like maybe you need some counseling, you might need to work with a professional, but um, it's I have definitely experienced that myself, with doctors not exactly knowing what they know. There's a problem. They can tell you what the problem is. They don't know how you got it, and they don't know how to get out of it. Like my mom, a number of years ago, she had really bad gut issues, and a part of it, I think, was because she had a number of health issues. So she was on a variety of medications. She'd been given antibiotics plenty of different times, and her gut was just in pain. And the doctors gave her a like pills that were ostensibly supposed to help, and it did nothing. I mean, it was like zero difference. So I asked a friend of mine who's been on the show before, Sarah Smith, and she said, try having her drink bone broth first thing in the morning, and then also consider some sort of like a fermented drink. And so we settled on kombucha, but she mentioned also kefir and other things can be helpful. And it was like in a ridiculously short amount of time, her stomach wasn't bothering her anymore. So again, this goes back to that whole thing that ancient Greek doctor Hippocrates found out, let your food be your medicine and your medicine be your food. And it's not to say that Western medicine, should never be pursued when it's necessary, but a lot of times uh, it's only symptom management. It's actually not actually let's say solving the real problem. And it sounds like that's one of the big things that you've come across. Now, how many people, you mentioned people driving for hours uh, to not
Correct.
just to talk to you, but also to like get advice and buy meat and poultry from you and things like that. What are some of the stories from the people who have changed their diet based on the food that you sell, and saw not just, oh, I feel a little bit better, I have not so much brain fog? I read some of the stories and they're like incredible. Like share a couple with them, with the audience, because I would do them no justice, but I mean, you've got some really great transformations that people have gone through.
So my favorite, I think, is Chandra because she'd been married for 20 years. She's in her 40s. She'd pretty much given up on getting pregnant. They'd never used birth control. She just couldn't get pregnant. And so she came up to our farm. She got some meat within the year of just eating just our meat and going to organic fruits and vegetables. She got pregnant and she just had a healthy baby boy. And she was like, this is a miracle because, like, literally, we did not think it was possible. The doctors were like, you just need to stop. It's not going to happen. And she's like, I swear it is the diet. It has made me feel better. She started losing weight. Her health symptoms started improving. And we have another lady the same way. She was in her 40s. She just switched to our meats. Her blood pressure came down. She got off all her meds and she's feeling great. So I do believe that food is medicine. And I do believe that a lot of times the doctors are just treating symptoms unless they can actually have a pill to fix you or you have a limb cut off, then they can fix that. But if it's just symptomatic or, oh, I'm in pain or whatever, they're just going to go after the symptom and not the root cause. And I think it's because they have such a hard time getting people to understand that food affects your body so much.
Yeah. I want to give a story about that too, because I have a colleague. Um, I didn't ask if I'm allowed to share the story, so I won't mention his name, but he's somebody that listeners would be familiar with. And he and his wife became parents a little bit later than what they expected because his wife had also been experiencing infertility issues, but there was, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what the story was, but there was some sort of a dietary change that she made that made it possible for them to have children. And now they have kids. And they weren't sure that it was even going to be possible. So there's another lady that I follow online, Taylor Burrows, I think is her name, and she's similar. She's in her early 40s now, and she just had her first child after many years of not being able to conceive. And what she did, if I remember correctly, because I don't know the whole story, was that she really focused on just getting her health up to, being a lot stricter with her health. And I don't know how unstrict she was prior or what the story was. And I don't know if she used, pharmaceuticals at all to help, but I don't believe she did. I'm not 100% sure. But people discount that. People a lot of times think that there are things that are just out of their hands. Uh, and it's, again, we want to make clear we're not saying that you shouldn't see a doctor or that the pharmaceutical industry has no value or anything like that. But when a lifestyle issue is the root cause of your problems, uh, just trying to play whack-a-mole with the symptoms is not a good idea. You need to just get an entirely different game in front of you. And a lot of people balk at the idea because they just don't think that they have the power to make those changes. And that's just totally wrong.
Correct.
Well, you
Correct.
had another cool story. A couple of them. There was a gentleman who'd lost a bunch of weight and
Yes.
got off
Glenn lost
medications. Yeah.
70 pounds just by changing his diet, and he went on a full carnivore diet. The picture is incredible. I mean, he was, of course, that's beef jerky in his mouth, not a cigar, of course.
Sure.
But of course, but besides that, he has a few other issues, but we won't go there.
Right.
But he had a huge gut. He was on 6 medications. He was taking ibuprofen for pain, and a similar just within, I believe he was at changed it over for a year. And all he did was start walking, no weightlifting, no nothing. And he lost the weight. Like, he's got a flat stomach now, minus the 6-pack abs. But don't we all wish we had that, right?
Yeah, that's quite a bit harder to achieve. That's you don't just wake up and find you got them.
Well, that's a shame. So he is now like, he's doing great. And my friend Jen, who lives down the road from me, she actually, I thought that she'd only lost 85, but I was corrected the other day. She told me she'd actually lost 112. She was up to 225 pounds.
Wow.
And she is now down to 112. Believe it or not, she's actually thinner than me now. And
Incredible.
but she's healthy. She's got off her medications. She's looking good. Her hair is coming back. My hair came back too, amazingly. So I think people just don't understand that there is so much involved in the food that we're putting into our bodies.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes down to, because now she swears by our chicken. Like, she comes by and she's like, I got to have another box of chicken. I need this stuff. This is great. But she also is drinking the broth with it
Hmm.
because that has a lot of collagen in it. So that also helps to thicken up your hair and bring that back. But I think people underestimate all that. I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where, oh, it's a chicken breast. That's the healthiest. And you grab it. But what most people don't realize is that when you're cooking up a chicken and you leave the bone in it, then it actually makes for a juicier chicken
Mm.
than if you
Interesting.
cook it without the bone.
Interesting. It does make sense actually because I think about, when I cook chicken quarters versus chicken breast, and there's always a big difference in terms of the flavor, of course. And I'm not too terribly surprised about that because, what's interesting. I was at a conference earlier this year, called the Definitive AI Seminar by a guy named Perry Marshall, who's a very, very bright guy. And they had a lot of very interesting speakers. And one of the things that Perry did a great job of was talking about, um, you know, in order, he said, in a world that's going to become more and more AI driven, what's going to make you stand out is being more human. So doing the things that are uniquely human are going to be the things that are going to attract people to you, to the services you offer, to the to the kind of person that you are. And one of his suggestions was make it a point to try to get good at like maybe 5 different disciplines. And he said one of the things you're going to understand when you do that is the process toward mastery in from any of these directions is identical. So now it's going to make it easier for you to understand what exactly it means to be able to become good and competent at something. And the fact is, that's just the way life works in general. That's the way the body works. I mean, you can eat well and not exercise and still have health problems. You can exercise and not eat well and still have health problems, or you could do both of those things and not sleep well and still have health problems. So we have this tendency to, and I recently had a very well known coach on my program, a guy named Dan John. I don't know if you've heard of him, but the listeners most certainly have. And that was one of the things we talked about, is that one of the issues that so many people have, or that we have really, even in the world of Western medicine, is that people have become so specialized that they end up with these horse blinders on. Now, I know that's going to make sense to you because you live on a farm, you see horses all the time, when they got the blinders on. And that's how people operate in many cases. They think, I just need to exercise and that's it. Or I just need to eat better and that's it. But the reality is that we're a whole human being, and that in order to really um, express ourselves the way that we're supposed to and develop ourselves the way that we're supposed to, we need to be an integrated human being. So how we eat, what we eat, what the food that what we eat eats. I think that makes sense. Also plays a really big role. And now I would bet too that the people who are buying the food that you sell and who are seeing all these great results, they're probably more excited about exercise. They're more excited about living a physical life because now they don't feel imprisoned in their body. They feel liberated by it.
Correct. And they're doing a lot of walking. A few people who have come out to the farm, they've asked me what I do. I do kettlebells. I love it.
Nice.
So of course I've shown them how to do kettlebells, which they find amusing because they're like, why does a farmer need to do kettlebells in addition to everything else you're doing? And carrying their own feed bags and doing other things just doesn't work everything.
Sure.
The kettlebells, it works all the trouble spots quite well, where you are definitely going to be sore the next day. Um, and it amazes me. It's still like you keep upping the weight, you do more reps, you're always going to be sore in this.
Yeah.
But they're very effective. So I mean, I love what you're doing.
I like to hear that. And I think that's good to see too, that there's a direct correlation not only between, an otherwise pretty rugged life working on a farm, but also finding time to exercise. What's interesting to me is that that was actually what a lot of some of the better known strongmen in history did. Not all of them. Some of them were just professionals and they only lifted weights and they didn't have hard jobs outside of that. But a couple of examples: Tennessee strongman Bob Peoples, who was a guy who weighed about 180 pounds, 181 pounds, and he deadlifted 727 pounds. And this was in the 1940s, full time job as a farmer. This may not mean as much to you, but people who are familiar with barbell lifting, this will mean a lot. A double overhand, meaning both hands on it, like one might grab a pull up bar. It's extremely difficult to lift a precipitous amount of weight with the double overhand deadlift, and he did it. And I think the only support gear that he had was just a back brace, so no wrist wraps, anything like that. Similarly, Paul Anderson, probably the strongest man who ever lived, was also a farmer. He lived in, I think he was born in Tennessee, but you know what? I think he lived in Georgia. I'll have to look it up. I'm drawing a blank, but he was freakishly strong. And again, farm job, and then he would also lift weights. When he had the time. It's like the perfect combination, of like really distilled exercise with kettlebells or calisthenics, and then the real world type of lift this, move that there. It'll turn you into a Superman or a Superwoman in this case, which is pretty impressive. Now, apart from that, like how much do you work out a couple times a week? Do you find that that's a pretty good supplement for the farm work you have to do?
I do. I usually do about 5 to 6 times a week. And I'm only honestly doing it for 15 minutes, the kettlebells.
Great.
And then I actually do it. Okay. I started doing the kettlebells to warm up when it was cold in the morning. So
Yeah.
I'd get in here, I'd warm up my body, break a sweat, and then I would go out and do farm chores. And I found it was easier to do the farm chores than going out with a cold body. Obviously, I know with common sense. But then going out with a cold body and then being like, oh my gosh, lifting this 50-pound bag is so horrible this morning and I'm freezing. And so I realized, my fingers and toes would warm up a little bit more. So
Great.
that's why I started doing it first thing in the morning before I went out to do my chores. And it actually helps. And, you know,
That's awesome. No, I think you got the right idea. I think, again, 15 minutes 5 to 6 days a week is an excellent approach, particularly if you have a very physically active job. I think too, people who don't have a very physically active job, but they're also not currently physically active, they'd be amazed what 15 minutes a day, a couple of days a week would do, or 9 minutes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, listeners. So no, that's really cool, and I think it's especially interesting that you had intuited that it would help you with the farm work and vice versa. I'm sure the farm work helps to keep the kettlebell training continuing to progress, so you can add weight, you can add reps, and so on and so forth. Now, what are some pointers that you would have for people who want to start eating better and they at least want to take the first steps in the right direction? So it's like, what are some things that at the grocery store that they should avoid? You talked about the dirty dozen. I think there's also a filthy 15, as I recall. You might know more about this than I do. I saw the word just the other day in preparation for this podcast, and I was like, I'll ask her about it. Um, what are some things that people don't necessarily need to worry so much about buying organic? And what are some things that people at a minimum should start thinking, I'm going to get this organic and let's just see what happens?
like I don't worry about stuff like with bananas. It has a peel. Stuff like strawberries that is sprayed directly, I'll tend to go organic on that. But as far as the grocery store is concerned, the outer wall is always what you need to shop. Just skip
Sure.
the middle, always go for the outer wall. And you'll be just doing that alone and just skipping the processed foods out of your diet is I would say that's just probably the first step instead of worrying about is it organic? It's not. I mean, it's always probably better to get organic,
Mhm.
but if you're choosing a candy bar rather than an apple, obviously go for the apple. But also don't worry so much. I think the other thing people are like, I don't have time to cook.
Yeah.
Um, I only have time for the process. The crock pot or the Instapot are your best friend. You would think that I work from home. I have loads of time to cook. I do not. So I literally will pop some meat, some vegetables into a crock pot, set it to low, walk away. And
Yeah.
I'll come back and just a little bit of salt, pepper, maybe some seasonings, you're good to go. And I think people overthink it and think they have to do this whole fancy meal. We also include a lot of the recipes that I personally cook that are just super easy. And it's really meant to be like any good steak. If you go to a steakhouse and you're dousing it with Heinz 57 before you even taste it, it's probably not the best steak. But if you have a really good quality meat, I think people are going to be surprised to know that when you have a real chicken or a real piece of beef for the first time in your life, chicken has flavor on its own. You don't actually need to doctor it. And I think people are going to be surprised of, oh my gosh, this is what real food tastes like. For people that have come to the farm the first time just to have an egg, a boiled egg, they're like, my goodness, the taste difference is amazing. So just getting that real food in your body I think is just probably the first step. It's just tasting real food.
Hmm. Are there any things that people should look for in terms of their health, their appearance, their energy levels, that would help them get an insight into how they're feeling? Because, for instance, one of the things I made it a point through most of this year to work on getting better sleep. So I started keeping a journal the next day about, how I slept, what are some of the things that seemed to help, what are some things that I should avoid. And it made a big difference. And so I think Now, my eating has for the most part been on point, but I will give the audience this one pointer that I thought, I don't know why I didn't think about it sooner. Well, I take it back. I do know why, but um, uh, I found that eating white rice, although it's not bad for you and it's a really great source of immediately available carbs, it was I wasn't eating a ton of it, but the amount that I was eating, because the insulin response is a lot higher, I was storing a lot more body fat. So I switched over to just potatoes and vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. Vegetables and fruits I was already eating plenty of. Potatoes, no. Uh, but it was crazy just how quickly I started to lose body fat and muscle levels stayed the same. So I was getting the carbs that I needed for energy and things like that, but I was not getting the additional weight around the middle, and I lost like 5 pounds without making a whole ton of extra changes. So understanding that making these small changes can have a big impact. What are some things people should look for? Should it be how they look in the mirror? Should it be like their complexion, or their hair, or energy levels at certain times in the day where they might dip? Like, do you have anything that you tell people, like, start to look for this so that you have like an objective thing that you can measure, in addition to any of the surprise things that you might notice, where it's like, oh, all of a sudden, I bounce out of bed in the morning because I have so much energy. Are there any other things that people could look for where they might be able to see a physical difference? Because you said people saw that with you, they noticed that you look different, and that was kind of the thing that helped you to understand, wow, okay, this really is working. I don't just feel better, actually, I just appear better. Have you
Yeah.
have you discovered anything like that yet, or is that something that's still in the works where you're like trying to narrow it all down?
Well, for me, my complexion is a lot better
Yeah.
than it was. You don't break out as much when you're eating healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't use any face creams or makeup or anything. And also, my hair is thickened up. And I think a lot of women, as you approach this age, you start getting bald spots, just like the men, even though we don't want to talk about this as women, because it's embarrassing. But, and I think overall, that you don't have, for the women, guys can ignore it, but for the women, when you're eating correctly, you don't have as bad of cramps
Mm-hmm.
on your time of month. So that's something in the hormonal aspect of it that I think that a lot of women don't correlate, that if you go and you have McDonald's or Burger King, that's actually going to cause a lot, a lot heavier flow. It's going to cause cramps. It's going to cause a lot of things that women don't want.
Yeah.
So by eating healthier, you can start avoiding a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very salient information. But it sounds like basically what people can look at is anything that you feel like maybe you're having an issue with, whether it's complexion or the quality of your skin, your hair, all sorts of other things. Some of the lady issues that you mentioned. Start taking a look at that when you start changing what you eat, because very often it sort of like resets the way that your body's supposed to work naturally. And
Correct.
that's probably the thing for people to look at. If you wanted to see the individual differences, they're better eating, and again, eating in particular food that is uh, fit for human consumption.
Mhm.
That's probably the thing that you want to look at, is whatever ails you, see if it helps at all. Now you have a very interesting and I think very, very important webinar for people to check out. Very entertaining, very interactive as well. Where can people go to watch that webinar and get some more information?
So if they go to Hendricks Farm, McBean, Georgia, so it's HENDRICKS, like Hendricks Motorsports,
Mm-hmm.
farm, and then MCBEANGA.com. And it will take them right over to the webinar.
Right on. And I'm going to make sure that I include that in the show notes and the description, so that people who don't want to type that out, they can just click a link and they'll be magically transported right off to the website. Well, Jenny, thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you
And
for inviting me.
been my pleasure. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.